The roar ripped through the usual stillness of Bloomfield Hills. A pack of black motorcycles, aggressive and menacing, descended, scattering the peace of the quiet suburban street. They screeched to a halt right in front of the elegant mansion of the Charles Preston family. Tattooed youths in heavy leather, like demons emerging from roaring machines. Their eyes darted around, full of defiance. On the porch, under the soft yellow light, Charles Preston, a distinguished 90-year-old man, watched them. His face betrayed no fear, only the unsettling stillness of someone who had witnessed too much. The leader, a tall figure with a red bandana tied around his head, swaggered forward, his gaze settling on Mr. Preston. A contemptuous smile stretched across his face. "Hey, old-timer." His voice was raspy, dripping with mockery, shattering the heavy silence. "Nice place you got here." Loud, boisterous laughter erupted from the group, a crude and malicious sound. Charles Preston remained still, his deep-set eyes fixed on the one who insulted him. Not a word in response, not a flicker of movement. His silence only seemed to thicken the tense atmosphere. The savage laughter subsided, then flared up again, louder, more brazen. One of them cranked up the volume on a portable speaker strapped to a motorcycle rack. The jarring and meaningless rock music tearing through the evening quiet. They began to swagger across the lush green lawn of the Preston home, their heavy leather boots trampling the blooming flowers. A few empty beer cans were tossed, clattering onto the stone walkway. From the porch, Charles Preston continued to observe silently. His face remained impassive, without a hint of anger or fear. His eyes, hidden behind his glasses, followed every rude action of the youths, as if committing each detail to memory. His hands rested lightly on the wooden armrests of his chair, his long fingers gently tapping a rhythm, the only sign of his intense focus. The leader, with the red bandana, approached the white picket fence surrounding Mr. Preston's garden. He leaned against the fence, tilting forward, his gaze directed defiantly at the old man. "What's the matter, old-timer?" he sneered, deliberately taunting. "Aren't you gonna come out here and tell us to keep it down a bit? Or are you deaf already?" Another burst of laughter echoed, a piercing and unpleasant sound. Charles Preston still didn't reply. He merely closed his eyes briefly, as if enjoying a light breeze, then opened them again, his gaze as still as a calm autumn lake. His silence seemed to further provoke the youths. Another one, younger, with sticking out blue-dyed hair beneath a backward baseball cap, picked up a cobblestone from the ground and hurled it at the Prestons' wooden gate. A dry thwack echoed in the stillness. He and his companions roared with amusement. At this moment, Eleanor Johnson, Mr. Preston's wife, an elegant woman nearing 90, slowly stepped onto the porch. She placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, her gaze gentle but firm as she looked towards the youths. Her appearance only heightened the contrast between the crude, noisy bikers and the calm, dignified couple. The leader glanced at Eleanor, his mocking smile becoming even more insolent. "Oh, look, Granny's out for some air too. Careful you don't catch a cold." Charles Preston gently placed his hand over his wife's hand on his shoulder, a small gesture of love and protection. He still said nothing, but his eyes, when he looked at his wife, held a warm, tender light, like a small flame burning steadily in the winter night. The youths, seemingly taking the Preston's silence as a sign of weakness, grew even bolder. They began showing off dangerous driving stunts, revving their engines loudly right in front of the house. The harsh sound of the engines reverberated through the quiet neighborhood, rattling window panes. The leader, after performing a boastful wheelie on his motorcycle, stopped right in front of the porch, just a few feet from Mr. and Mrs. Preston. He leaned back, one hand on the seat, the other pointing directly at Mr. Preston with a smug look. "Hey, old man," he yelled, his voice overpowering the roaring engine. "Why don't you come out here and party with us a little to liven things up? Or are your arms and legs all falling apart?" A few of his buddies laughed again, clapping in approval of their leader's insolence. They stared at Mr. and Mrs. Preston, waiting for a reaction, a flash of anger, a plea. But Charles Preston remained impassive. He sat upright in his chair, his steady eyes fixed on the youth taunting him. There was no fear, no confusion. His gaze held a deep stillness. like a bottomless abyss that the youth's noise and recklessness couldn't touch. Eleanor Johnson gently squeezed her husband's shoulder, a small action filled with boundless support and solidarity. She looked at the youths with sad eyes, not out of fear, but seemingly out of pity for their recklessness and thoughtlessness. The Prestons' persistent silence began to make the youths uneasy. Their noise and crude words seemed to lose their effect against this strange calmness. A hint of confusion began to appear on the leader's boastful face. He hadn't expected the prey he had chosen to be so resilient and unyielding. One of the group, perhaps feeling they had gone a little too far, tugged lightly on the leader's jacket. "Hey, Mike," he whispered, his voice a little worried. "Don't you think we've gone a bit overboard?" Mike, the leader, frowned, shaking off the other youth's hand. "Overboard? What are you talking about? We're just having some fun." He tried to maintain his smug look, but his voice had lost its initial confidence. He looked back at Mr. Preston, still sitting silently like a statue, and a strange feeling of unease began to creep into his heart. Mike cleared his throat, attempting to break the palpable tension. He stepped fully onto the sidewalk, moving closer to the Preston's fence, his tone becoming more arrogant and challenging. "Hey, old woman," he sneered, his eyes flicking between Mr. Preston and Eleanor. "Why don't you two go inside and get some rest? It's too noisy out here. Not suitable for frail old folks like you." A few of the group snickered again, but this time their laughter lacked its initial carefree quality, tinged with a hint of awkwardness. They were beginning to sense something unusual in the Prestons' demeanor. Their silence wasn't fear, but an invisible, sturdy wall that their noise and provocation couldn't penetrate. Eleanor Johnson gently placed her hand on her husband's arm, a comforting and supportive gesture. She looked at Mike with kind eyes. Devoid of any resentment, her voice was soft, yet clear enough to cut through the surrounding noise. "Now, you youngsters," she said calmly, her tone like speaking to mischievous children. "It's getting late. Aren't you planning on heading home soon?" Eleanor's gentle question seemed to momentarily halt the youth's aggression. They exchanged glances, their eyes showing a flicker of confusion. Her words held no confrontation or reproach, but rather a genuine concern, leaving them unsure how to react. Mike, the leader, tried to regain his initial arrogance. He smirked. "This old lady's a funny one. This is a public street. We can hang out wherever we want. You think you can tell us what to do?" Just as he finished speaking, another member of the group forcefully threw a soda can onto the Prestons' lawn. The dry clink echoed, shattering the newly established quiet. They laughed again, as if trying to mask their earlier unease. Charles Preston finally stirred slightly. He slowly rose to his feet, his tall frame, despite his advanced age, still exuding an undeniable air of dignity. He looked directly into Mike's eyes, his deep gaze seeming to hold a lifetime of stories. His silence was no longer passive endurance, but a preparation for something. Under Mr. Preston's steady gaze, Mike involuntarily felt a prickle of unease. The smirk on his face gradually faded. He couldn't explain the strange feeling, but it was as if a latent power was emanating from this elderly man. A power that his noise and aggression couldn't shake. Charles Preston spoke not a word, yet his presence alone was enough to completely shift the atmosphere. He slowly descended the porch steps, each footfall solid on the stone walkway. The yellow light cast a halo of quiet white hair around his head, a still point amidst the chaos the youths had created. Mike and his companions involuntarily took a step back. Their initial overconfidence seemed to dissolve before the old man's cold composure. They exchanged glances, their eyes flicking with doubt and worry. Mr. Preston stopped right at the fence line, facing Mike. His face showed no anger, but his deep-set eyes held an unwavering resolve. The silence between the two men, one old and one young, one calm and one arrogant, grew heavy and suffocating. Finally, Mike couldn't bear this oppressive silence any longer. He tried to force a smirk, but it looked strained and far less confident than before. "What's the matter, old-timer?" he said, his tone no longer carrying its initial arrogance. "Planning on doing something to us? Gonna call the cops, huh? Go ahead, we're not scared." Charles Preston remained silent. He merely gave a slight nod, a gentle movement that nonetheless conveyed a profound meaning. Then, He reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out an old-fashioned flip phone. The youths watched his movements. Their eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of mockery. They assumed the old man was about to call the police, and the thought didn't faze them in the slightest. But instead of dialing the emergency number, Mr. Preston opened his contacts and searched for a name. His eyes focused on the screen, his brow furrowing slightly as he scrolled through the list. Finally, he stopped at a name, his trembling finger gently tapping it. The phone rang, a discordant sound amidst the loud rock music and the youth's boisterous laughter. Mr. Preston held the phone to his ear, his expression stern. "Clarence, is that you?" His voice was low and gravelly, yet clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Where are you right now?" The youths froze. They looked at each other, their initial curiosity slowly morphing into suspicion. The name, Clarence, sounded vaguely familiar, but they couldn't quite place where they had heard it before. Mr. Preston continued his phone call, his tone still calm but now laced with a resolve that hadn't been evident before. He briefly described the situation, showing no sign of worry or fear. "I think perhaps you should swing by here for a bit," he said, his eyes never leaving Mike's face. "There are some young people here who seem to be getting a little overexcited. I believe your presence might help things become a bit more comfortable." After finishing his call, Mr. Preston flipped the phone shut and slipped it back into his pocket. He looked directly into Mike's eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. This smile didn't carry the gentle warmth of an old man, but rather a quiet confidence and underlying power that sent a shiver down Mike's spine. "Well, we'll just have to wait and see," Mr. Preston said slowly, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "My Clarence will be here any minute now." Silence descended upon the group of youths. The name, Clarence, coupled with Mr. Preston's calm and confident demeanor, had sown a seed of indescribable unease within them. Their initial arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by cautious, suspicious glances at one another. They didn't know who this Clarence, the old man had mentioned, was. But the way he spoke, his unwavering gaze, everything suggested this was no ordinary person. Mike, the leader, tried to dispel the growing anxiety within the group. He cleared his throat, attempting to appear unfazed. "Clarence who? Old-timer?" he said, his tone trying to maintain its superiority but now sounding somewhat off-key. "Probably just some senile old codger. What do we have to be afraid of?" But his own insecure tone betrayed the worry lurking beneath. His companions no longer responded with loud laughter as before. Instead, they began to look at each other warily, as if trying to find answers in each other's eyes. Eleanor Johnson gently walked to her husband's side, placing a warm hand on his arm. She looked at the youths with kind eyes, but within that gaze also shone a quiet resolve, as if she were standing by her husband, ready to face whatever was to come. Time passed slowly, heavily. The loud rock music still blared from the speaker, but now it seemed out of place and discordant in the tense atmosphere. The youths began to shift restlessly, occasionally glancing towards the end of the street, as if expecting something. Then, from afar, another engine sound echoed. This engine didn't roar loudly and boastfully like their motorcycles, but rather emitted a deep, solid rumble, full of power. The sound grew louder and louder, and a distinct change came over the faces of the youths. Their initial arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by genuine worry and unease. A sleek black SUV slowly appeared at the end of the street. It didn't brake suddenly or rev its engine loudly, but rather approached the Preston home deliberately, like a black panther stalking its prey. Another similar SUV followed right behind it. The youths stood up straight, their eyes glued to the two vehicles approaching. The noise died down noticeably, leaving only the deep rumble of the two cars as they slowly came to a stop opposite the Preston house. The doors of the first SUV opened in unison. 4 men stepped out, their movements calm and decisive. They were all middle-aged men with rugged faces and sharp eyes. All wore black jackets, and on their chests was stitched a strange insignia, an emblem that only those who had experienced something particular would recognize. Clarence Johnson, Mr. Preston's younger brother, stepped out from the driver's seat of the first SUV. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a full silver beard that gave him a dignified and respectable appearance. Although he wasn't wearing a uniform, his upright posture and steady gaze exuded the bearing of a soldier. The three men with him looked similar, all close friends of Clarence from his time in the military. The youths were completely stunned. Mike's initial arrogant expression had turned into genuine terror. He stammered, unable to utter a word. Clarence's gaze swept over the group of youths standing as if rooted to the spot, then settled on Mike's pale face. Without a word being spoken, Mike could feel the weight and authority emanating from the man who had just stepped out of the vehicle. "You must be the one who's been having all the fun here just now, right?" Clarence said slowly, his voice deep and warm, yet carrying an unshakable resolve. Each of his words rang out clearly in the quiet space, overpowering the lingering strains of rock music from the speaker. Mike swallowed hard, trying to regain some composure. We were just," he stammered, his eyes darting away, not daring to look directly at Clarence. "Just disturbing my sister," Clarence said calmly, his gaze shifting to Mr. Preston and Eleanor standing on the porch. A fleeting moment of tenderness flickered in his eyes as he looked at his loved ones. But when he turned back to face the youths, his gaze hardened like steel. "A woman who has dedicated her entire life to this country." Clarence's words hit the youths like a bucket of cold water. Their arrogant expressions completely vanished, replaced by confusion and belated regret. They began to realize they had chosen the wrong target. At that moment, another black sedan pulled up behind the two SUVs. Patricia Miller, a distinguished woman with neatly styled short hair, stepped out. Her demeanor exuded strength and decisiveness no less than Clarence's. Following her were two other middle-aged men, local veterans whom Patricia had contacted. They were all people who had known and respected Eleanor Johnson for years. Patricia surveyed the scene, her sharp eyes settling on Mike. "Do you boys have any idea whose house you're standing in front of?" Her voice was icily calm. "Do you know what this woman you've been mocking has done for this country?" Mike hung his head, not daring to answer. The arrival of Clarence and Patricia, along with their companions, had created an invisible atmosphere of pressure, causing the youth's aggression and arrogance to evaporate like sea foam. "Now," Clarence said, his voice still calm but full of authority. He gestured towards the beer cans and trash scattered on the Prestons' lawn. "You have two choices. 1. You clean up all this mess yourselves, apologize to my sister, and leave this place, never to return and bother anyone else in this neighborhood again. 2. He paused slightly, his eyes looking directly into each of the youths' pale faces. "We handle this in another way, which will likely involve the police and other authorities." Clarence didn't need to finish his sentence. The youths understood his meaning perfectly. Their initial cocky expressions had completely disappeared, replaced by fear and regret. They began to bend down and pick up the beer cans and trash scattered on the lawn, their movements clumsy and hurried, as the youths hung their heads and hastily began picking up the trash. Clarence's expression remained stern. Patricia took a step forward, her voice sharp. "Just cleaning up isn't enough. You've caused a significant disturbance and shown grave disrespect to a respected member of this community. Your behavior is unacceptable." Mike, the leader, looked up, his face a mixture of fear and a desperate attempt to justify himself. We didn't mean to. It was just." Clarence cut him off, his voice cold. "You're old enough to be responsible for your actions. Just is not an excuse." He turned to Patricia. "Patricia, do you have any information about similar incidents involving this group in the past?" Patricia nodded, her eyes like sharp razors. "I've spoken with a few people in the area. This isn't the first time this group has caused trouble. They have a history of making noise, disturbing the peace, and showing disrespect towards older residents." This information caused the youths' faces to grow even more fearful. They realized this wasn't just a minor incident they could easily shrug off. Clarence looked directly at Mike. "Your actions weren't just impolite, they bore the hallmarks of a hate crime. We have enough evidence to report this incident to the police and demand a thorough investigation." Mike's face paled. He began to grasp the serious consequences he and his companions could face. The arrogant words and boastful actions from earlier now felt like a crushing weight. Please, sir, please, ma'am," Mike stammered, turning to look at Mr. Preston and Eleanor with a pleading expression. "We're sorry. We'll never do anything like this again. Please forgive us. Eleanor Johnson maintained her calm demeanor, but a hint of sadness flickered in her eyes as she looked at the youth's frightened faces. She had witnessed too much belated regret in her lifetime. Charles Preston spoke slowly, his voice deep and thoughtful. An apology is necessary, but it doesn't erase what you've done. You need to understand the hurt your actions have caused. Clarence continued. We won't let this go easily. You will be held accountable. We will be contacting the police and providing them with all the information we have. The final decision will rest with the law. The youths hung their heads, not daring to protest. They knew they had crossed a line and now faced serious repercussions. Severe punishment seemed unavoidable. In the tense atmosphere, Patricia spoke, her voice firm. In addition to reporting this incident to the police, we will also be contacting your parents. She looked directly at each of the youths' pale faces. I'm sure your families need to know about this behavior. Patricia's words landed like a heavy blow on the youths' morale. The prospect of facing their parents' disappointment and anger caused them to sink further. Their initial swagger had completely vanished, leaving only regret and fear clearly visible on their faces. Clarence nodded in agreement with Patricia. He turned to look at Mr. Preston and Eleanor, his gaze softening. We won't let this go by easily. They need to understand that their actions have consequences, not just legally but also morally and socially. Mr. Preston sighed softly, watching the youths hunched over as they nervously picked up the trash. In his eyes, the anger had faded, replaced by a lingering sadness. He had lived long enough to witness the mistakes and recklessness of youth. But this disrespectful and hateful behavior still caused him a pang of sorrow. Eleanor Johnson stepped down from the porch, walking towards the youths who were diligently cleaning. She stopped in front of Mike, who still had his head bowed, his shoulders trembling slightly. Her voice was gentle, yet carried an undeniable weight. You youngsters, she said, her tone devoid of reproach, but filled with deep understanding. Life isn't always easy. Everyone makes mistakes, but the important thing is that we recognize our errors and try to make amends. She paused for a moment, looking into Mike's eyes, which still held a trace of defiance. Wealth or status doesn't give anyone the right to look down on others. We are all human beings, and we all deserve respect. Eleanor's words, gentle yet powerful, seemed to touch a part of Mike's hardened heart. He raised his head to look at her, a flicker of remorse in his eyes. Clarence spoke, his voice resolute. We will be recording the personal information of each one of you. If there are any repeat disturbances in the future, we will not hesitate to seek the intervention of the law. Patricia and her companions began to note down the names and contact information of each member of the group. The youths cooperated meekly, not daring to offer any resistance. The presence of the veterans, along with the firm stance of Mr. Preston and Eleanor, had completely subdued them. After all the information had been recorded, Clarence ordered the youths to clean the entire area in front of the Preston house thoroughly, not leaving behind even a small piece of litter. They obeyed silently, bending down to work carefully and diligently. Finally, when everything had been cleaned up, Clarence looked directly into Mike's eyes once more. Do you have anything you want to say? Mike swallowed hard, his voice soft and full of regret. We're really sorry, sir, ma'am. We'll never come back here again. Clarence nodded, but his gaze didn't soften completely. I hope you remember your words. And more importantly, I hope you learn a lesson from this. Patricia added, remember, your actions don't just affect yourselves, they can hurt other people. Think carefully before you do anything. The youths nodded silently, not daring to meet the eyes of those facing them. They knew they had made a serious mistake and had received a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The lesson drawn from this story isn't just for those reckless youths, but also serves as a wake-up call for the entire community. Wealth or status is not a shield against discrimination, and silence is never the answer when facing injustice. True strength lies not in noise and aggression, but in the steadfastness, self-respect, and solidarity of those who dare to stand up for what is right. The Preston family's story has proven that even in their twilight years, a person can still be a beacon of integrity and a source of inspiration for positive change in society. If you found the story of the Preston family's perseverance and resilience thought-provoking, Please support the channel by hitting the like button. Don't forget to share it to spread this story to more people. And if you want to follow similar stories about justice and change, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.